The alarms in Site-19's experimental Wing D had three distinct tones. The first was administrative. The soft two-note sequence that indicated a scheduled procedure was entering its active phase, the sound of institutional routine running on schedule. The second was operational, a sharper four-beat pattern that meant something had deviated from parameters in a way that required attention but not panic, the sound of a problem being managed. The third tone was the one that Site-19's personnel spent their careers hoping not to hear, a continuous, modulating frequency that had been specifically designed to be impossible to ignore and deeply unpleasant to listen to, the sound of a situation that had stopped being manageable and started being something else. The third tone had been running for 47 seconds when Dr. Ewan reached the observation deck. "Calibration status," she said, to the researcher at the primary console, as she pulled up the experimental data on her secondary display, with the focused speed of someone who had been doing this for long enough that urgency and precision were not in conflict. The calibration was running at 94.7% stability, the researcher said. He was young, 3 years at the Foundation, which was enough time to have learned that controlled fear was more useful than uncontrolled calm, but not enough time to have developed the specific professional steadiness that the third tone required. Then the energy signature from the observation target shifted. Something on the other side. The other side interacted with the array, Ewan said. "Yes. That wasn't supposed to be possible," Ewan said. "No," the researcher agreed. "It wasn't." The observation chamber below the deck was a circular space 30 meters in diameter, its walls lined with the containment architecture that Site-19's engineering division had spent 8 months designing specifically for the study of interdimensional phenomena. Energy dampeners, reality anchor arrays, the specific infrastructure of a facility that had been built around the premise that observation was possible without interaction, that you could look at something through a window without the something being able to look back. The array in the chamber's center was not a window anymore. It was a door. The rift had opened at the chamber's focal point, a vertical tear in the space that the reality anchors were supposed to be maintaining as inert, its edges glowing with the specific luminescence of a dimensional boundary under stress. Through it, visible with the perfect clarity of something that was not a recording or a projection but an actual aperture into another location, was a skyline. A city skyline. Buildings that looked like Tokyo but weren't quite. The architecture subtly different in the specific way of a city that had developed differently, that had built itself around different requirements, and above the skyline, moving across it with the casual authority of something that had every right to be there, a figure in white and crimson. Large, the heat distortion around it visible even through the rift's dimensional boundary. "That's a person," the researcher said. "Yes," Ewan said. "A person on fire," the researcher said. "Partially on fire," Ewan said. "The fire appears to be a property of the person rather than a threat to the person." She was already recording. The data collection protocols ran automatically, but she wanted manual documentation alongside them, the specific professional habit of someone who understood that automatic systems captured what they were designed to capture and that unprecedented situations produced data that automated systems weren't designed for. The energy signature, the thing that destabilized our calibration. "It's coming from him, from the fire." "What is it?" the researcher said. "I don't know," Ewan said. "I don't have a classification for it." She paused. "Log it as anomalous energy type unknown, pending further study, and get Director Harlow on the channel." She was looking at the rift, at the figure in white and crimson, who had apparently noticed something, some visual anomaly, some distortion in the air above the building he was patrolling past, and had stopped, was hovering, looking at something that from his side was presumably a shimmer in the air, a visual distortion, the specific appearance of a dimensional breach from the outside. "Close the breach," she said to the engineering team. "Immediately." "We can't," the lead engineer said from his station. "The energy from the other side. It's interfacing with the reality anchor array. The array was designed to maintain inert dimensional space. Whatever that energy is, it's interacting with the array's frequency and it's stabilizing the breach. The more we try to close it, the more stable it becomes. The energy is holding it open, Yuan said. Yes, the engineer said. The breach is being reinforced from the other side, not intentionally. I don't think the source is aware of the effect, but the interaction is... The figure in white and crimson made a decision. Yuan saw it happen. The specific body language of a person who had assessed a situation and had chosen to investigate rather than report. The forward lean of someone moving toward something they'd decided to approach. The figure accelerated toward the distortion's hero world side. "Close the breach," she said again, with the specific urgency of someone who had understood what was about to happen and was trying to prevent it in the seconds available. "I cannot close it," the engineer said. The figure hit the breach from the other side at speed. What happened to the reality of the breach when something passed through it from the interaction side was not what the theoretical models had predicted. Instead of a controlled passage, the figure's energy signature interacted with the breach boundary in the specific way of two incompatible systems encountering each other and producing a result that neither had been designed for. The breach expanded. The reality anchors overloaded in the specific sequence of a system that had been given more than it was built to handle. The experimental wing's emergency containment doors engaged with the sound of 3 tons of reinforced composite sealing every exit. And Endeavor. Number 1 hero, the man who had spent his career being the strongest available, hit the chamber floor from a height of 4 meters, and having been translated from Tokyo airspace to a containment chamber in Site 19, in the fraction of a second, it had taken the breach to process his passage. He landed on his feet. Because Endeavor landed on his feet, he looked at the chamber, at the reinforced walls, at the observation deck above, where Yuan and the research staff were looking down at him with the specific expressions of people who were trying to run a professional assessment, while also processing the fact that a large man with flames erupting from the left side of his face had just appeared in their experimental containment chamber. He looked at the sealed exits. He looked at the rift, still open, smaller now, the reduced energy interaction making it a window rather than a door. The Tokyo skyline visible through it as a reminder of where he had been 6 seconds ago. "What?" Endeavor said, with the specific quality of a man whose patience for unusual situations had been tested by his profession and refined by his personal history into something that expressed itself as controlled anger rather than confusion. "Is this?" Director Harlow's voice came over the facility channel before anyone else could respond. He had been in his office on the administrative level when the third tone activated and had been moving toward experimental wing D since the 17-second mark. He was currently 3 corridors away, and he was not running because Harlow did not run, but his walking had achieved a pace that covered the distinction. "Dr. Yuan," he said on the channel. "Status." "We have a contact," Yuan said. "Humanoid. Arrived through the breach from the observation target. Exhibiting anomalous energy properties consistent with the destabilizing signature, the energy is originating from the contact rather than being an external factor." She paused. "He's not in distress. He appears to be assessing the situation." "Containment status," Harlow said. "The chamber is sealed," Yuan said. "He's contained." "Keep him that way," Harlow said. "I'm on my way." Yuan looked at Endeavor. Endeavor looked at her. "I can hear you," he said, to the observation deck, with the specific directness of a man who had been in enough situations to know that being able to hear the people in charge was more useful than pretending he couldn't. "Whatever you think you're doing, I am a pro-hero. Number 1, as of 2 years ago. My name is Enji Todoroki, and you are going to explain this situation to me immediately." Yuan processed the statement. The phrase pro-hero was not in any terminology she recognized. The concept of a numbered ranking for individuals with anomalous abilities was not a system she had any reference for. The name meant nothing to her databases, but the tone, the absolute certainty of a person who had been in charge of dangerous situations for long enough that being told what was going to happen was simply the way he communicated, that she understood completely. "We will explain," she said, into the chamber's communication system. "Please do not attempt to damage the containment infrastructure." Endeavor looked at the walls, at the ceiling, at the sealed doors. He had been in worse situations. He had fought a high-end Nomu at a temperature that had melted the pavement under his feet. He had carried his own burning body through a hospital in recovery while managing the specific guilt of having been the strongest available and not having been strong enough. He sat down on the chamber floor with the specific dignity of a man choosing to sit rather than being made to, folded his arms, and waited. In the 47 seconds between the third tone's activation and Endeavor's arrival in the chamber, something in Containment Block 7 had been paying very close attention. SCP-7491 had been in Foundation containment for 11 years, 3 months, and 14 days. It knew this with the precision that it knew everything it had learned in those 11 years, which was considerable. Because SCP-7491 was not an entity that wasted time it had. The Foundation's designation was accurate in its classification. Cater class, anomalous intelligence exceeding standard human parameters, containment requirements, maximum security, no direct interaction, all observation through remote systems only. The containment was thorough. The Foundation was good at thorough. What the Foundation was less good at was imagining that thorough containment and complete isolation were different things. SCP-7491 had been isolated from physical contact for 11 years. It had not been isolated from information. The Foundation's internal communication systems, designed for efficiency between researchers who needed rapid information sharing, produced electromagnetic signatures that SCP-7491 had spent 3 years learning to read through the specific sensitivity of an intelligence that had nothing else to do with its time. The signatures were not words, they were patterns. But patterns were enough for a mind that had the time and the capability to decode them. It had known about the experimental Wing D project since the 18th month of its initiation. It had understood the theoretical basis of the interdimensional observation array before the Foundation's own researchers had completed their validation studies. And it had been waiting, with the specific patience of something that had decided patience was the only tool available, and had therefore developed a relationship with patience that exceeded any human practitioner of the virtue, for a calibration error. Not any calibration error. The specific calibration error that would occur when the array's observation target was a reality containing energy that interacted with the anchor frequency in the precise way that the interdimensional contact between the two systems would produce. It had taken 3 years to engineer that interaction from inside its containment cell. The alarms were the confirmation that the engineering had worked. SCP-7491 did not move. Movement was monitored, and the Foundation's cameras were comprehensive, and its staff was professional, and the appearance of normalcy in containment was the most important resource an intelligent contained entity had. The one resource that, once lost, could not be recovered. It remained in its containment cell. It was not going anywhere yet. The portal had opened. The portal would remain open, and the entity that had been in containment for 11 years, 3 months, and 14 days was prepared to be very, very patient for a little while longer. Hawks had been 3 blocks from the distortion's manifestation point when his wing feathers registered the atmospheric pressure change. This was the specific advantage of a sensory system that had been developed through training to pick up information that human senses didn't prioritize. The feather's sensitivity to air displacement, temperature differential, electromagnetic variation, the 1,000 subtle environmental signals that his quirk processed continuously as background data. He had learned to trust the background data. The background data had kept him alive in situations where everything else had failed. The atmospheric pressure change was not large. Not a storm, not an explosion, not anything that would have registered as unusual to anyone standing on the street below. But it was wrong in the specific way that things were wrong when the physics of the local environment had been briefly and fundamentally violated. He banked toward it. The distortion above the building was not quite visible. It was the specific visual effect of something that existed at the edge of what light could accurately represent. a shimmer that his eyes registered as a visual artifact and that his quirk's atmospheric sensitivity registered as the output of something that had been in the air and was no longer in the air. Endeavor had been here. Endeavor's fire had an atmospheric signature that Hawks could read at distance, the specific thermal and pressure profile of a quirk that burned at temperatures high enough to affect local air density in ways his feathers could detect. The signature ended at the distortion point. He did not touch the distortion. Hawks had survived as long as he had by respecting the specific principle that things you didn't understand were more dangerous than things you did, and the distortion was something he did not understand. He circled it, reading its edges, the atmospheric sensors in his feathers building a picture of something that his intelligence background had not prepared him for. He opened his comm. "This is Hawks, requesting a patch to HPSC command." A pause while the connection established. "I have a situation at Shinjuku North. Endeavor is missing. There is a spatial anomaly at his last known position." He looked at the distortion, at the shimmer in the air that his feathers were telling him was a boundary between here and somewhere else. "I need classification authority for an unknown phenomenon, and I need it in the next 5 minutes. Because whatever this is, it's not staying invisible much longer." The HPSC command channel connected with the specific efficiency of an institution that had been managing pro-hero situations for decades. Hawks listened to the response. Then he looked at the distortion again, at the shimmer that was a boundary between here and somewhere else, at the invisible door that had swallowed the #1 hero in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon patrol. "Understood," he said into the comm. "I'll hold position, but command, whatever classification you assign this situation, I need you to know something." He paused, choosing words with the care of someone who had learned that the words you used to describe something shaped what people were willing to do about it. Whatever took Endeavor, it didn't take him the way a villain takes a hero. There was no fight, no explosion, no pursuit. He looked at the distortion. He went through it, like it was a door, and I need to know what's on the other side. Command's response indicated that an investigation team was being assembled. Hawks looked at the distortion. The investigation team was going to take time he wasn't sure he had. He reached out one of his crimson feathers, slowly, carefully, the specific care of someone testing ice they weren't certain would hold, and touched the distortion's edge. The feather went through it. He pulled it back. The feather came back intact, unchanged, carrying no information about what it had touched except the specific atmospheric data of a location that was not Shinjuku North. He looked at the distortion for a long moment. Then he reached for his comm again. "Command," he said. "I need a second opinion on something. Is Mirko currently available?" In Containment Block 7, SCP-7491 felt the portal's energy signature stabilize into its new configuration, the reduced but persistent aperture that would remain as long as the energy interaction continued. It had anticipated this. It had also anticipated the Foundation's response, the emergency protocols, the containment procedures, the professional management of a situation that was being classified as an anomaly when it was actually a door. What it had not anticipated was the additional energy signature that it was now detecting through the electromagnetic patterns of the facility's monitoring systems. Something in Containment Block 3 had become aware of the portal. SCP-7491 processed this information with the attention it gave to unexpected variables. SCP-777, the entity in Block 3, whose containment was the Foundation's most resource-intensive operation, whose specific properties made its presence in any environment a cascading hazard, whose interaction with a world full of visually capable individuals with quirks would produce outcomes that even SCP-7491's modeling had not fully mapped. This was not part of the plan. SCP-7491 adjusted. Adjustment was, after 11 years of containment, one of its most developed capabilities. And in the observation chamber, Endeavor sat on the floor with his arms folded, the flames on his face burning at the low, steady intensity of someone who was calm, the way a controlled fire was calm. Entirely contained, entirely ready. waiting for the moment when the container was no longer necessary. He had been in worse situations. He had fought worse things. He was going to need more information before he decided what this was. Director Harlow arrived at the observation deck with the specific quality of a man who had been managing anomalous situations for 23 years and had developed a relationship with the unexpected that most people would have called composure, and that was actually something more deliberate. The practiced stillness of someone who understood that the first thing a new situation needed from the person in charge was a clear mind rather than a fast reaction. He stood at the observation deck's edge and looked at Endeavor. Endeavor looked back. The specific quality of the look that passed between them was the look of two people who had both spent their careers being the person in charge of dangerous situations and who were simultaneously performing the assessment that their experience required. Harlow saw a large human male with anomalous thermal properties, contained but not restrained, posture indicating controlled aggression rather than panic, apparent willingness to wait for information rather than act on incomplete data, capable, disciplined, not an immediate threat in the conventional sense. Endeavor saw a man in a dark suit who moved with the specific economy of someone who had been in command for a long time, who had arrived at a containment situation involving an unknown entity, and was looking at him with the evaluating attention of someone running a classification rather than a threat assessment. Not afraid, not aggressive, the specific stillness of institutional authority. Director Harlow, Ewan said. Site Director, Experimental Wing D. The contact arrived through the breach at... I read the report on the way down, Harlow said. He looked at Endeavor. You said your name is Enji Todoroki. I did, Endeavor said. And you're a pro-hero, Harlow said, producing the phrase with the careful pronunciation of someone repeating terminology they don't have context for. What is a pro-hero? Endeavor looked at him with the specific expression of someone being asked to define something so fundamental to their world that the question itself indicated a level of unfamiliarity that is difficult to process. A licensed professional, he said. Government authorized. We maintain public safety. We stop villains. He paused. You have no idea what any of that means. Correct, Harlow said. And I have no idea where I am, Endeavor said. Also correct, Harlow said. We're working on explaining that. Work faster, Endeavor said. Harlow looked at him for a moment. Then he turned to Ewan. The energy signature, the anomalous property. Status. Still active, Ewan said. The contact's anomalous energy is what's stabilizing the breach. As long as he's in the chamber, the breach remains open. She paused. The energy appears to be a property of his biology, rather than an external anomaly. He's generating it naturally. It's called a quirk, Endeavor said, from below. He had heard the exchange. The chamber's acoustics were not designed to prevent the contained subject from hearing the observers, a design consideration that the chamber's architects had not prioritized because the previous occupants of the chamber had not been people with opinions about being discussed in the third person. In my world, approximately 80% of the population has one, an individually expressed superhuman ability. Mine produces and controls flames at high temperatures. Harlow looked at him for a long moment. 80% of your population, he said. Give or take, Endeavor said. Harlow looked at Ewan. Ewan was already running the implications through her documentation. If 80% of the population in the observed reality has anomalous properties by our classification system, she said carefully, then the SCP Foundation's existing framework for... Later, Harlow said. First, the breach. Second, the contact status. Third, what came through the breach that we haven't accounted for yet? Ewan looked at him. What came through the breach that we... The emergency channel activated on a different tone than any of the 3 standard tones. This one was new, added to Site 19's alert system 4 years ago, after an incident that had produced a protocol revision extensive enough to require its own emergency designation. Containment Block 3. Containment Anomaly. Harlow closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. SCP-777 is out of containment, the security channel said. with the flat precision of someone delivering information that had been classified as too serious for emotional inflection. Breach occurred 4 minutes ago. Estimated cause: the experimental wing's reality anchor disruption produced a cascading effect on Block 3's containment infrastructure. Block 3 personnel are sheltering in place. MTF response is... Hold MTF response, Harlow said. Sir, hold it, Harlow said. He opened his eyes. SCP-777 cannot be pursued directly. You know that. MTF response will produce more casualties than containment breach management. Isolate Block 3. Seal every corridor between Block 3 and Experimental Wing D, and find me its current location. He turned to the observation deck's secondary display. SCP-777's containment file was not long. The Foundation's documentation philosophy was comprehensive, but for certain entities, comprehensiveness produced documents that were not safe to read in full, and SCP-777's file had been classified at a level that meant most of Site-19 staff had access only to the first 2 pages. The first 2 pages contained the designation, the classification, the containment procedures, and a single behavioral note that had been written by the researcher who had initially contained the entity and who had not, afterward, produced any further research. The behavioral note said, "Do not look at it." The MTF unit that came through the portal's Hero World side arrived in Shinjuku North at 1423 on a Tuesday, which was the kind of specific temporal detail that MTF Commander Chen noted and logged, because the temporal detail mattered for the incident report, and because logging specific details was the thing you did when you were managing a situation where the larger picture was still assembling itself. Chen had read the breach report on the transport to the portal. He had read it twice, and with the focused attention of someone whose job required building operational plans from incomplete intelligence, and who had developed a high tolerance for uncertainty combined with a very low tolerance for avoidable mistakes. What the report told him: the breach was two-way and stable. The other side contained human or human-adjacent population. The energy that was stabilizing the breach was biological in origin. Standard containment protocols were inapplicable until contact assessment was complete. What the report did not tell him: what Tuesday afternoon in a populated urban district looked like when 4 people in tactical gear emerged from a spatial anomaly above street level. The answer was loud. The civilians on the street below the distortion's manifestation point had been watching the shimmer in the air for approximately 12 minutes, long enough for a small crowd to have assembled, for several people to have made calls to the Hero emergency line, and for the local news cycle to have dispatched a camera crew that was currently pointing equipment at the shimmer and would in approximately 40 seconds be pointing it at Chen's team. Hawks was already there. This was the detail Chen registered first. A man in a yellow hero costume with crimson wings, hovering at approximately the same altitude as the portal's emergence point, watching Chen's team materialize from the distortion with the specific expression of someone who had been expecting something to happen and was still surprised by exactly what it was. "You're not Endeavor," Hawks said. "No," Chen said. He had his weapon raised. Standard MTF protocol for emergence into unknown environments. "Identify yourself." "My name is Hawks," Hawks said. "Number 2 Hero, and I'm going to need you to lower that weapon before the crowd below decides this is a villain situation. Because if it becomes a villain situation, I will not be the most concerning response that shows up." Chen processed this. The weapon stayed raised. "You know the person who came through this portal?" "Endeavor," Hawks said. "Yes, is he?" "In containment," Chen said. "Unharmed, pending assessment." Hawks was very still for a moment. "Containment," he said, with the specific quality of someone who had processed a word and found that the processing had produced more questions than it had answered. "You're exhibiting anomalous behavioral properties," Chen said. "Those wings are..." "My quirk," Hawks said. "Fierce wings. It's registered. I'm licensed. I'm a pro-hero." He looked at Chen with the evaluating attention that his intelligence background expressed as apparent ease. "You don't know what any of that means." "Correct," Chen said. "And you've put Endeavor in containment," Hawks said. which means you have a containment facility somewhere, which means you have an organization, which means this, he gestured at the portal, is institutional. You're not individuals, you're operatives. Yes, Chen said. Then we need to talk, Hawks said. Quickly, because I made a call before you arrived, and the response to that call is going to be here in about 90 seconds. And the response is Mirko. And Mirko's first instinct when she sees 4 armed individuals emerging from a spatial anomaly is going to be... The sound of someone hitting the building's rooftop at high speed was the specific sound of a person who moved fast enough that their arrival produced an impact rather than a landing. Mirko was on the rooftop. She looked at Chen's team. Chen's team looked at her. Villain operation, she said, with the absolute certainty of someone for whom the classification required no deliberation. Armed, spatial anomaly. Civilian population at risk. She rolled her neck with the specific preparatory motion of someone who had already made the decision and was completing the physical warm-up. I'm going to need you to come with me. We are not villains, Chen said. Armed, unknown individuals emerging from a dimensional rift in a populated area, Mirko said. Your classification is not up to you. You're exhibiting anomalous. Mirko moved. She was faster than Chen's training had prepared him for. Not because the Foundation's training was inadequate. MTF training was among the most comprehensive tactical preparation available anywhere in the world. But because the Foundation's training had been built around the specific parameters of anomalies that were encountered in the world as it existed. And Mirko existed in a world that had been developing human physical capability beyond standard parameters for 4 generations. She hit Chen's point unit before the unit completed the evasion their training directed, and the impact of a kick at the velocity she was generating, producing exactly the outcome it was designed to produce. The unit went down. Stand down, Hawks said quickly, not to Chen's team, to Mirko. Mirko, stand down. Mirko looked at him. They're not villains, Hawks said. Or if they are, they're a kind of villain I've never seen, and I need more information before we start a fight. He looked at Chen. Tell me something that helps me help you. Chen looked at Hawks, at Mirko, who was maintaining her position with the readiness of someone who had stood down but had not dismissed the situation, at his unit member on the ground who was getting up with the specific expression of someone performing a professional damage assessment on their own situation. We're here to assess the breach, Chen said. Containment, observation, and if possible, stabilization or closure. We have no hostile intent toward this population. You put Endeavor in containment, Hawks said. We put an unknown entity with anomalous energy properties that were destabilizing our experimental infrastructure in containment, Chen said. If he's who he says he is, the containment is temporary pending assessment. If, Hawks said. We don't have the information to confirm his identity, Chen said. We have no reference for a pro-hero. We have no classification for a quirk. He said the word with the careful pronunciation of someone reproducing unfamiliar terminology. We are managing an unknown situation with the protocols available to us. Hawks looked at him for a long moment, at the specific expression of a man who was telling the truth about his limitations, which was a different expression than the expression of a man telling the truth about his intentions. And Hawks had spent enough of his career reading the difference to trust the distinction. All right, Hawks said. We talk, but Endeavor gets... The screaming started 3 blocks south. Not the screaming of a crowd reacting to a fight or a hero situation. The specific screaming of people who had encountered something that their threat assessment had not prepared them for. The primal register that humans produced when the category of bad exceeded the category of dangerous and entered the category of wrong. Hawks's feathers extended outward with the reflex of a sensory system that had been trained to gather information before his conscious mind had finished registering that information was needed. And what the feathers told him was not a clean read. The atmospheric disturbance 3 blocks south was chaotic. Multiple people moving in multiple directions. The specific pattern of a crowd dispersing from a central point with maximum urgency. Something else came through the portal, he said. It was not a question. Chen was already on his comm. Site 19, This is MTF Commander Chen. Report on SCP-777's current status. The response from Site-19 had the specific quality of information arriving from a situation that was still being managed. SCP-777 breached containment 7 minutes ago. Current location unknown. Last confirmed position, Experimental Wing D, adjacent to the breach point. It came through, Chen said. His voice had lost the professional evenness it had maintained since emergence. I'd not panic. The Foundation didn't do panic. But the specific flattening of tone that happened when someone processed information that they had been professionally trained to treat as worst case, and were now treating as current. What came through? Hawks said. Chen looked at him. Something that cannot be looked at, he said. Hawks stared at him for exactly 1 second. Then he turned to Mirko. Don't look at anything that looks wrong, he said. Don't look at it. If you see something that makes you want to look at it, close your eyes. That's not helpful, Mirko said. It's all I have right now, Hawks said. Move. He was already moving, not toward the screaming, which was the direction that every hero instinct he had was directing him. Away from it, he eyed toward the civilians at the street's edge who had not yet started running and who needed to start running before they became people who had looked at something they were not supposed to look at. Because Hawks was fast, and he had understood, from Chen's expression, that fast might not be enough if he was going the wrong direction. The screaming moved. This was the specific detail that Hawks's feathers registered before his eyes confirmed it. The atmospheric displacement of a crowd in maximum dispersal. The pressure waves of people running from a central point that was itself moving. The specific pattern of a threat that was not stationary. SCP-777 was not in one place. It was walking through Shinjuku's street grid with the deliberate patience of something that understood its own capability and was not in a hurry. It didn't need to be in a hurry. Hawks pulled his crimson feathers into a tight formation around his face, not covering his eyes, not yet, but positioned to cover them in the fraction of a second that the warning required if the warning came. He was moving at speed through the street level, staying below the building line, on reading the crowd's dispersal pattern the way his intelligence training had taught him to read panic, not as chaos, but as data. The specific vectors of maximum fear pointing back toward the source like compass needles. The source was moving north-northeast, toward the commercial district, toward the lunch crowd that hadn't heard the screaming yet because it was 3 blocks away, and the city was loud, and Tuesday afternoons in Shinjuku were not typically occasions that required people to be listening for the sound of catastrophe. He opened his hero comm. All pro-heroes in Shinjuku sector, this is Hawks. Emergency priority. Unknown threat, north-northeast corridor. Do not engage visually. I repeat, do not use your eyes to engage. Close your eyes if you encounter the threat. Evacuate civilians without visual confirmation of threat location. He paused because the next instruction was the hardest one to give in a profession built around seeing clearly and responding to what you saw. Trust your other senses. Do not look. The comm channel was briefly silent with the specific silence of professional heroes processing an instruction that violated every training protocol they had. Then, confirmations. 3 heroes in the sector, all moving, all trying to understand what don't look meant in operational terms. Hawks understood what it meant. He had spent 2 minutes in conversation with MTF Commander Chen, and those 2 minutes had been enough to understand that the thing loose in Shinjuku was not a villain with a quirk, not an anomaly in the conventional hero world sense, not something that could be engaged, contained, or reasoned with using any tool in the pro-hero arsenal. It was something that the SCP Foundation had been managing for years, and the SCP Foundation's management protocol was eyes closed. He found the first group of affected civilians at the corner of Shinjuku's North Commercial Block. 7 people sitting on the pavement with the specific posture of individuals who had stopped being able to manage their own bodies. Not unconscious, not injured in any visible sense, but no longer fully present in the way that people were present when their cognitive function was intact. Their eyes were open. They were looking at nothing. The specific nothing of a gaze that had passed through the object it was directed at and kept going. Hawks looked at them for exactly the time required to confirm what he was seeing. Then he looked away. "Chen," he said, into the comm line that the MTF commander had established during their conversation. 7 civilians, North Commercial Block. Status consistent with your containment file's description of SCP-777 exposure. What's the progression timeline? Chen's voice came back with the flatness of someone delivering information they wished they didn't have. 90 seconds from visual contact to full cognitive dissolution. After that, the Foundation's medical division has been studying the effect for 4 years. We don't have a reversal protocol. No reversal, Hawks said. No reversal, Chen confirmed. Hawks looked at the 7 people on the pavement. He looked away. He kept moving. Mirko had been given one instruction. Don't look at anything that looks wrong. The instruction was not specific enough for a combat situation, which was the specific problem with instructions that were generated by people who understood the threat and were trying to communicate it to people who didn't, under time pressure, in a language that the recipient's experience had not given them the vocabulary to receive. She was moving through Shinjuku's back streets, faster than Hawks, faster than anyone in the sector. The specific velocity of a hero whose entire combat philosophy was built around being where she needed to be before the situation decided she needed to be there. With her eyes tracking everything the way her eyes always tracked everything. The trained visual acuity of a fighter who had made seeing accurately into a survival skill. She rounded a corner. Something was at the end of the street. She couldn't have described it afterward. Not because the description was forbidden. Not because her training prevented it, but because the visual information that her eyes had sent to her brain had been processed by a cognitive system that was not designed to handle what SCP-777 produced in the visual cortex of anyone who looked at it, and the processing had produced the specific sensation of a thought that had started and had then stopped existing before it was complete. She looked away. Fast. Faster than thought. The reflexive aversion that her body had apparently decided on before her mind had finished registering what was happening. She had been moving and she was now facing a different direction, her eyes pointing at a section of wall that was entirely unremarkable, on her breathing at the specific rate of someone whose body had processed a threat signal and was managing the aftermath. Her hands were shaking. Mirko's hands did not shake. She had fought villains whose quirks produced direct neurological interference. She had been hit hard enough to crack bones and had continued fighting because continuing was what she did. She had never, in her career, had the experience of a threat that her body had responded to before her mind had a chance to decide how to respond. "Hawks," she said into her comm. Her voice was steady. Her hands were shaking. I almost looked at it. "Almost," Hawks said. "Almost," she confirmed. "It's on Miyuki Street, moving north. It's—" She stopped. Hawks. It was looking for me to look at it. The way it was positioned. It moved into my sightline deliberately. A pause on the comm. "Yes," Hawks said. "That's consistent with what Chen told me. It wants to be seen," Mirko said. "Yes," Hawks said. Another pause. "That's the most disturbing thing I've heard in my career," Mirko said. "And I've had a very eventful career." "I know," Hawks said. "Close your eyes and navigate by sound. Can you do that?" Mirko thought about what closing her eyes in a combat environment meant. About the specific vulnerability of removing her primary sensory input from a threat assessment. About the fact that she had almost looked at something that Chen's file described as producing irreversible cognitive dissolution. "Yes," she said. "Good," Hawks said. "I need you to keep it contained to the block it's on. Don't engage. Just keep the civilians out of its path, eyes closed." "How do I keep civilians out of its path with my eyes closed?" Mirko said. "Sound," Hawks said. "Yell, make noise. Drive them away from the direction you need them away from. You don't need to see to be loud." Mirko thought about this for half a second. "I hate this," she said. "I know," Hawks said. She closed her eyes and started making noise. In Site 19's experimental Wing D, Endeavor had been in containment for 22 minutes when Dr. Ewan came down to the chamber level. Not to speak to him. The protocol for an unclassified contained entity with anomalous properties was clear about the conditions under which direct researcher contact was permissible, and those conditions had not yet been met. She came down because the data she was collecting from the remote sensors was insufficient for the analysis she needed to run, and the analysis she needed to run was the one that answered the question Director Harlow had asked her. What exactly is this person? And what does the anomalous energy he's producing mean for our understanding of the breach? She stood at the chamber's ground-level observation window. Reinforced composite, the specific material that Site-19's containment infrastructure used for windows in primary containment chambers because it was transparent and also capable of withstanding outputs that most things couldn't withstand. And looked at Endeavor. Endeavor looked at her. "You're the researcher," he said. "Dr. Yuan," she said, into the chamber's communication grill. "Yes. You've been studying the energy output since I arrived," he said. "Yes," she said. "It's a quirk," Endeavor said. "I explained this." "You described it," Yuan said. "Description and explanation are different things. You told me what it does. I need to understand what it is." She looked at her sensor display. "The energy your quirk produces is, in our classification system, we categorize anomalous phenomena by their properties and their relationship to known physical law. Your energy output doesn't violate known physical law in the way that most anomalies do. It operates within thermodynamic principles. It's not impossible. It's just extremely improbable for a biological system. 80% of my world's population has a biological system that produces something improbable," Endeavor said. "I'm aware," Yuan said. "That's what makes this difficult to classify. Our classification system was built for a world where anomalous properties are rare, where they're exceptional, where they require explanation because they're extraordinary." She paused. "You're from a world where the extraordinary became ordinary 4 generations ago. The classification framework doesn't have a category for ordinary and context extraordinary." Endeavor looked at her with the specific expression of someone who had received an accurate description of his world from an unexpected source. "That's a more precise summary of the quirk era than most people manage," he said. "I'm a researcher," Yuan said. "Precision is the job." A pause. "The portal," Endeavor said. "It's still open." "Yes," Yuan said. "Because of my quirk," Endeavor said. "The energy your quirk produces is interacting with our containment architecture in a way that's stabilizing the dimensional boundary," Yuan said. "Yes. If I suppress my quirk," Endeavor said, "the portal closes." Yuan looked at her sensor display, ran the calculation that she'd been running since she understood the interaction mechanism, looked at the result. "Theoretically, yes," she said. "The energy interaction is what's maintaining the breach. If the energy source is removed or suppressed, the breach should collapse." "Should," Endeavor said. "We don't have complete data," Yuan said. "The collapse could be instantaneous and clean, or it could be less clean. We don't know what happens to dimensional boundaries under rapid collapse conditions in this specific configuration. So closing it might be dangerous," Endeavor said. "Closing it badly might be dangerous," Yuan said. "Closing it correctly requires understanding we don't have yet." Endeavor looked at the rift, still visible from the chamber floor, the Tokyo skyline through it now showing the specific afternoon light of a city going about its business, unaware that its #1 hero was 47 minutes missing. "Something else came through," he said. It was not a question. Yuan was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "What?" Yuan looked at her classification documentation, at the containment file that most of Site-19 staff had access to only in its first 2 pages, at the behavioral note that had been written by the researcher who had not produced any further research. "Something that we contain because it cannot be allowed to exist freely in a populated environment," she said. "Its specific property makes it incompatible with any environment where people can see." Endeavor processed this. "It's in my world now," he said. "Yes," Yuan said. His flames, which had been burning at a low, steady level since his arrival, increased in intensity with a specific increase of a quirk responding to its user's emotional state. not losing control. Endeavor did not lose control of his quirk, but the control expressing itself at a higher output level. The specific way that Hellflame responded to the specific emotional state of being told that a threat was present, where the people you protected were present and you were not there. "Get me out of this room," he said. "I can't do that yet," Ewan said. "The protocol—" "I am the #1 hero," Endeavor said. "Something dangerous has entered my city. The protocol can—" "Director Harlow's authorization is required for any modification to containment status," Ewan said, with the specific firmness of someone who was not going to be moved by the argument being made at her. Not because she was indifferent to it, but because she understood that the protocol existed precisely for situations where the argument for deviation was compelling. "I'm sorry, I can't make that decision." Endeavor looked at her, at the chamber walls, at the rift, and Tokyo through it, and the afternoon light of a city that was 22 minutes into not knowing where its #1 hero was. He sat back down. He was not done with this conversation, but he was done with this particular argument, because the argument was not going to open the door, and the door was the only thing that mattered. Deku arrived at the portal's Hero World manifestation at 14:51. He had been contacted by the Hero Public Safety Commission 12 minutes after Hawks' initial report, which was the HPSC's standard response time for a Priority 1 anomalous incident, which itself told him something about how they were classifying the situation. Priority 1 was the designation reserved for incidents where the anomaly could not be categorized within existing frameworks and where the response required someone with a specific combination of analytical capability and combat capacity that the HPSC's deployment list used as its primary criteria. He had read Hawks' field report on the way. He had read it twice. He was standing at the edge of the shimmer, the portal's Hero World manifestation. Smaller now than it had been an hour ago, but still open, still showing the industrial corridor of what appeared to be a high-security facility on the other side, with the specific expression he wore when he was processing something that his analytical frameworks were working to categorize and hadn't completed the categorization yet. "Hawks briefed you?" Mirko was beside him, eyes still closed, navigating by the specific sound of the city around her with the focused attention of someone who had spent the last 20 minutes developing a skill she'd never needed before. "Yes," Deku said. "You can open your eyes. SCP-777 is 4 blocks east. Hawks has a containment perimeter." Mirko opened her eyes with the specific relief of someone returning to a sense they'd been missing. "Good. I've been navigating blind for 20 minutes and I navigated into a vending machine twice." "I know," Deku said. "Hawks mentioned—" "He mentioned the vending machines," Mirko said. "He mentioned the sound of vending machines being hit at speed," Deku said. He was still looking at the portal, at the facility corridor visible through it, industrial and purposeful, the specific architecture of an institution that had been built around security as its primary design consideration. The organization on the other side, they have Endeavor. "In containment," Mirko said, with the specific quality of someone who had been told this twice and was still processing the implications. "They didn't know what he was," Deku said. "They classified him as an anomaly because his quirk was destabilizing their experimental system." He paused. "In their world, quirks don't exist. The concept of 80% of the population having superhuman abilities is outside their framework. They manage anomalous phenomena as exceptions, rare exceptions." He looked at the portal. In their world, Endeavor would be classified as something that needed to be studied and contained because there's nothing else in their experience to compare him to. "That's—" Mirko started. "Terrifying," Deku said. "Yes, but also, think about it from their perspective. An unknown entity with extraordinary thermal properties appears in a high-security experimental facility from a dimensional breach. In their world, that's not a hero. That's a catastrophic anomaly." "So they're not villains," Mirko said. "I don't think so," Deku said. "I think they're doing what they do, which is managing things that are dangerous because they're unknown. The problem is that they're managing Endeavor the same way they'd manage something actually dangerous." He paused. And they released something actually dangerous into our world. A voice came from the portal. Not through it, from the observation position on the facility side, visible as a figure moving in the industrial corridor. The figure stopped at the portal's edge and looked through it at Deku and Mirko with the specific expression of someone who had been hoping someone capable of communication would be at the Hero World manifestation. "I'm Dr. Yuen," the figure said, through the imperfect acoustic bridge of the portal. "I need to speak with someone in authority." Deku stepped forward. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," he said. "Pro-hero. What's your entity's current location?" Yuen blinked. You're very young." "I'm aware," Deku said. "What's SCP-777's current location?" 4 blocks east, Yuen said, which was the information Hawks had already provided, and which told Deku that Yuen had real-time tracking on SCP-777 from the facility side, the Foundation's remote monitoring system extending through the portal. "We need to discuss a joint approach." "We're already working on it," Deku said. "The immediate priority is civilian evacuation from SCP-777's movement corridor. The secondary priority is containment. What does your containment protocol require?" Yuen looked at him, at the young hero with the notebook he was holding that she hadn't noticed until this moment. The specific detail of someone who had arrived at a crisis situation with documentation materials, because documentation was part of how he processed and managed information. "Remote navigation only," she said. "No personnel within 50 meters, no visual contact. The entity must be maneuvered into an enclosed space with no exits and with no personnel inside. It will remain in any space where there is nothing to see. The cognitive dissolution effect appears to require an audience. Without potential visual contact, SCP-777 becomes dormant. It goes into an empty room and stays there," Deku said. "Yes," Yuen said. "But the room needs to be—" "I know a building," Deku said. He looked at Mirko. "The old Dagobah warehouse. It's been empty for renovation for 3 months. No windows on the ground floor." Mirko looked at him. "You want to herd SCP-777 into a warehouse?" "I want to create a space it will choose to go into," Deku said. "There's a difference." He looked at Yuen. "Once it's contained, the joint protocol. You release Endeavor. We get your team member access to what they need for their assessment. We work on the portal together." Yuen looked at him for a long moment. At the young hero with the documentation notebook and the analytical mind that was running 6 steps ahead of the conversation, and the specific quality of someone who was treating this as a problem that had a solution and was working toward the solution rather than managing the problem. "Director Harlow will need to authorize Endeavor's release," she said. "Then get Director Harlow," Deku said. He was already on his comm, pulling up the Dagobah warehouse's structural data from his hero database, running the geometry of SCP-777's current movement corridor against the warehouse's location, calculating the route that would need to be cleared, the personnel that would need to be positioned, the specific choreography of maneuvering something you couldn't look at into a building it would choose to enter. He wrote it in his notebook, because that was what Deku did. He wrote the plan down, and then he executed it, and the execution was the thing that the plan existed for. "Hawks," he said into his comm. "I have a containment approach. Tell me the current position and I'll tell you what needs to happen next." Hawks's voice came back with the quality it got when someone else had done the analytical work and it had been done correctly. "Go ahead," Deku told him. A pause. Actually, that could work," Hawks said. "It'll work," Deku said, with the specific quiet certainty of someone who had done the analysis and trusted it. On the other side of the portal, in Site 19's experimental Wing D, Yuen was relaying the conversation to Director Harlow on the administrative channel. Harlow listened with the complete attention of someone building a picture from the fragments being provided. When Yuen finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Describe the young hero," he said. "Mid-teens," Yuen said. "Arrived at the portal manifestation with a documentation notebook, analyzed our containment problem, and proposed a solution in approximately 90 seconds. Currently coordinating a multi-hero containment operation for SCP-777 via comm channel while simultaneously maintaining a briefing conversation with me." She paused. He's methodical, very methodical, and he's treating this as a problem he's going to solve rather than a crisis he's responding to. Harlow was quiet for another moment. What's his quirk? Harlow said. I don't know, Ewan said. I didn't ask. Ask, Harlow said. The answer is going to be relevant. In SCP-7491's containment cell in Block 7, the electromagnetic pattern of Harlow's conversation with Ewan filtered through the facility's infrastructure in the specific way that all electromagnetic patterns filtered through the facility's infrastructure. Readable to the entity that had spent 3 years learning to read them as information. SCP-7491 processed the conversation, processed the description of the young hero, processed the phrase, his quirk, and in the specific way of an intelligence that had been planning for 11 years and had built its plan around variables it had carefully identified, in the specific way of something encountering an unexpected variable and running the implications. SCP-7491 revised. The plan had been built around quirk energy as a catalyst. It had not accounted for a specific quirk. It was accounting for it now. The Dagobah warehouse had 3 ground-floor entrances and no windows below the 2nd level. Deku had been in it once, 6 months ago, during a community cleanup initiative that had produced 3 hours of debris removal and 1 conversation with the building's owner about structural renovation timelines that had been more interesting than it had any right to be. He remembered the interior the way he remembered most things he'd been inside, completely. The specific spatial layout encoded in the part of his memory that had always treated environments as tactical data, regardless of whether the situation he was in at the time was tactical. The interior was a single large open space, the renovation having stripped it to its structural skeleton. Bare concrete floor, exposed steel columns, no furniture, no equipment, no objects that SCP-777 could use as sightline anchors. And critically, no exits on the ground floor except the 3 entrances, all of which could be sealed from the outside. It was, in the specific language of Dr. Ewan's containment protocol, an enclosed space with no exits and with no personnel inside. The question was getting SCP-777 to choose to go into it. It doesn't chase, Hawks said, into the comm channel. His voice had the quality of someone relaying information while simultaneously managing the operational situation the information described. Moving, reading his feather's atmospheric data, tracking SCP-777's position without looking at it. It positions. It finds places where people will be and it waits for them to look. If we move civilians out of its path, it has to move to find more potential contacts. So we create a path, Deku said. Clear everything between SCP-777's current position and the warehouse. Every civilian out, every hero with eyes closed or feathers up. Give it a corridor where the only thing at the end is an open door. And it walks into the corridor because there's nothing to see anywhere else, Mirko said. And it walks into the warehouse because there's an open door at the end of the corridor, Deku said. And once it's inside, we close the doors. What if it doesn't go into the warehouse? Mirko said. Then we try something else, Deku said. But I think it will. Ewan said it seeks visual contact, a completely clear corridor with an open door at the end. From SCP-777's perspective, and that's the most promising direction. You're predicting the behavior of something that produces irreversible cognitive dissolution, Mirko said, based on 90 seconds of analysis. Based on Ewan's 11 years of Foundation research, Deku said. I'm applying it. A pause. Fair, Mirko said. The evacuation coordination took 8 minutes, faster than it should have been possible to evacuate 4 city blocks in 8 minutes. But hero coordination at speed was the specific product of people who had trained for exactly this kind of operation, and who had developed the institutional muscle memory of moving civilian populations away from threats before the threats became immediate. 3 heroes in the sector, Hawks overseeing from altitude with eyes forward but feathers deployed as his sensory system, Mirko moving at ground level by sound, a 4th hero who had arrived at the sector's edge running the northern civilian corridor. The corridor cleared. SCP-777 moved into it. Deku was watching the motion through his comm connection to UN, who was tracking the entity through the Foundation's remote monitoring system. The portal's aperture wide enough to carry the monitoring signal through from the Hero world back to Site-19's observation systems. He was watching a dot on a wireframe map move down a digital corridor, which was the safest possible way to watch SCP-777, and which was still producing in him the specific sensation of watching something that should not be moving the way it was moving in a world that had not been prepared for it. "It's moving toward the entrance," UN said. "How fast?" Deku said. "Deliberate pace," UN said. "Consistent with previous behavioral observation, it moves slowly when there are potential visual contacts in proximity. It's not rushing. It's looking," Deku said. "Yes," UN said, "for anything that might look back." The warehouse door was open. Hawks had confirmed the opening with a feather, sent one crimson feather through the entrance to verify the interior before anyone considered the approach, the specific extension of his sensory system into a space that he could not safely approach himself. The feather had reported, "Empty interior. No thermal signatures, concrete floor, steel columns, the specific acoustic profile of a large empty space. Perfect." "It's at the entrance," UN said. Deku held. "It's pausing," UN said. "At the threshold." "It's deciding," Hawk said, from altitude. "Does it decide?" Mirko said. "It positioned itself deliberately in my sight line," Hawk said. "It moves toward potential visual contacts. It pauses at thresholds. Whether that's deciding in the way we decide, or whether it's something that looks like deciding from the outside, I don't know. But the behavior is consistent with something that is making choices." "That's," Mirko started. "Concerning," Hawk said. "Yes." A beat of silence on the comm channel. "It's going in," UN said. Deku released a breath he had been holding since the 8th minute of the evacuation. "Close the doors," he said. The 3 ground floor entrances sealed with the specific sound of industrial locks engaging, remote operated, and the hero who had arrived at the sector's edge running the closure from a position 3 blocks away, with a Foundation-provided remote access code that UN had transmitted through the portal. The warehouse was sealed. SCP-777 was inside. "Containment achieved," UN said, and her voice had the quality of someone who had been managing a crisis for 45 minutes and was experiencing the first moment of something that was not crisis. "The entity is contained. Behavioral protocol indicates it will remain dormant as long as the interior has no potential visual contacts." "How long will the doors hold?" Deku said. "SCP-777 does not attempt to breach containment," UN said. "It waits. The Foundation's longest containment interval without incident is 240 days. 240 days, Mirko said. "Yes," UN said. "In a warehouse," Mirko said. "In any enclosed space with no exits and no potential visual contacts," UN said. "The specific location is irrelevant. The conditions are what matter." Mirko was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of someone processing a containment philosophy that was entirely outside their professional framework. "In Hero Society," she said, we rehabilitate. We incarcerate villains. But the goal is always rehabilitation. Justice, something other than permanent containment. SCP-777 is not a villain," UN said carefully. "It doesn't have intent in the moral sense your framework implies. It's an anomalous phenomenon that produces irreversible harm through a mechanism we don't fully understand. Rehabilitation assumes a cognitive architecture capable of change. We have no evidence that SCP-777 has that architecture. So you just keep it in a room forever," Mirko said. "We keep the world safe from it," UN said. "Forever, if that's what forever requires." The silence on the comm channel was the specific silence of a professional encountering a philosophical position that is coherent and that they find deeply uncomfortable. "All right," Deku said into the silence. "SCP-777 is contained. Now we need to discuss the portal and we need to discuss Endeavor's release, and we need to do both of those things at the same time because they're the same problem." Harlow authorized Endeavor's release at the 49-minute mark. Not because the protocol had been satisfied. It hadn't, not fully. The assessment was incomplete, and the classification was pending. He authorized it because the situation had produced a calculation that the protocol had not been designed to perform. The cost of maintaining containment of an entity whose cooperation was needed for the resolution of a crisis exceeded the risk of releasing that entity into a supervised environment. He authorized it. And then he went down to the chamber himself, because the specific decision of releasing a Keter-adjacent contained entity was not a decision that Harlow delegated to the observation deck. He stood at the chamber door and looked at Endeavor. Endeavor looked at him. "Director Harlow," Endeavor said. "Yes," Harlow said. "You're the one who makes decisions," Endeavor said. "Yes," Harlow said. "Then make this one quickly," Endeavor said. "Something dangerous is in my city. The people who know what it is are on your side of this portal. The people who can manage it in the environment it's in are on mine. We need to be in the same conversation, and you have me in a room." Harlow looked at him for a long moment. At the contained entity that had been classified as anomalous, and that was, by every behavioral indicator, a professional who was angry about being away from a crisis rather than afraid of his containment. At the flames that had been burning at various intensities since arrival, currently running at the controlled low output of someone who had made peace with waiting and was managing that peace carefully. "My researcher tells me that a young hero on your side has already contained SCP-777, Harlow said. "Then let me out so I can thank him," Endeavor said. Harlow opened the chamber door. Endeavor walked out. He was larger in the corridor than he had appeared through the chamber's observation window. The specific recalibration of a person's presence that happened when the framing of containment glass was removed. Harlow was not a small man. He was looking up. "Your researcher," Endeavor said as they walked. "Yuen, she knows her work." "Yes," Harlow said. "She does. She told me about SCP-777's effect," Endeavor said. "The cognitive dissolution. In my world, we have villains whose quirks produce neurological damage. We have protocols for managing those situations. The protocol is always the same: get civilians out, get trained heroes in, minimize exposure. The difference is that our protocols assume the threat can be arrested and the damage can be treated." He paused. "Yours can't." "No," Harlow said. "That's why you contain," Endeavor said. "Not because you want to, because the alternative to containment is exposure, and exposure is permanent." "Yes," Harlow said. Endeavor looked at him. "I disagree with it," he said, philosophically. "Everything I've built my career around says that the response to a dangerous phenomenon is to neutralize it, not to store it." "I understand," Harlow said. "But I understand why you do it," Endeavor said. "I don't think you're wrong. I think we've developed different answers to the same problem because our worlds gave us different parameters." Harlow was quiet for a moment. This was, in 23 years of managing the Foundation's most complex situations, the most precise articulation of the Foundation's core philosophical position he had ever received from an external source. "Your researcher," he said. "The young one, Midoriya." "He's not a researcher," Endeavor said. "He's a hero, one of the best. He managed SCP-777's containment in 45 minutes with no Foundation resources and incomplete information," Harlow said. "In my experience, that's extraordinary." "In my world," Endeavor said, "that's Tuesday for him." They reached the experimental wing's observation deck. Through the portal, visible now at close range, the shimmer of the dimensional boundary showing Shinjuku from the inside, looking out. The city skyline, the afternoon light, the specific visual of the hero world seen from Site 19's containment chamber. Deku was on the other side, visible through the shimmer, standing at the portal's edge with his notebook in hand, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for the conversation that was about to happen. He looked at Endeavor. Endeavor looked at him. "You handled it," Endeavor said. "Hawks and Mirko handled most of it," Deku said, with the specific honesty of someone who could not take credit he hadn't earned, even in circumstances where taking the credit would have been easier. "I just ran the analysis." The analysis was the thing that needed running, Endeavor said. Deku looked at Harlow. Director, he said. You're Midoriya, Harlow said. Yes, Deku said. We need to talk about the portal. Dr. Yuen thinks Endeavor's quirk suppression will close it, but incomplete collapse could be dangerous. I have a different approach. Harlow looked at him. Show me. The portal had been open for 1 hour and 17 minutes when SCP-7491 made its move. Not a physical move. SCP-7491 had not left its containment cell, would not leave its containment cell, understood that the containment cell was the position of maximum advantage, rather than maximum restriction. An intelligence that had been contained for 11 years had developed a comprehensive understanding of what containment meant and what it didn't mean. And what it didn't mean was that the contained entity was without influence. The move was informational. The Foundation's internal communication systems, the same electromagnetic signature patterns that SCP-7491 had been reading for 3 years, were currently carrying an unusual volume of traffic. The portal situation had generated the kind of institutional activity that produced communication density, and communication density produced signature patterns that were richer in information than standard operational traffic. SCP-7491 read them with the attention of 11 years of practice, and found the variable it had been waiting to find. Izuku Midoriya, age 16. Quirk, one for all. The specific quirk that had been identified in Foundation intelligence fragments. Fragmentary observations of the hero world through the experimental array before the breach, as an anomaly within anomalies. Not simply a quirk in the conventional sense. A quirk that carried, in its energy signature, the accumulated power of every previous wielder. A quirk that was, in the Foundation's classification framework, the closest thing the hero world had produced to an SCP in its own right. A quirk that was currently, at this moment, in proximity to the portal. SCP-7491 had engineered the portal's opening because it had understood that quirk energy would stabilize the breach. It had planned to use the breach as an exit, not immediately, not crudely, but over time, through the specific patient application of influence on both sides of the dimensional boundary. But one for all was not a planned variable. One for all was something that changed the plan entirely. Because SCP-7491 had not been trying to escape into a world full of powered individuals. It had been trying to find a power source capable of doing something that 11 years of containment had made it certain could not be done from inside a containment cell. It had been looking for a power that could break a different kind of containment entirely. The revision to the plan required 12 seconds. SCP-7491 had been working on plans for 11 years. 12 seconds was nothing. It began. The sabotage of the portal stabilization arrived as a fluctuation. Yuen noticed it first. The specific sensor reading of a system that had been running at steady parameters and was now showing variance that didn't correspond to any of the variables she had identified as affecting the portal's stability. Not Endeavor's quirk energy, which was still operating at its standard output now that he was out of containment. Not the reality anchor array, which had been running at consistent compensation levels since the breach. Something else. Something interfering with the dimensional boundary from the Site-19 side. Director, she said, on the channel. I see it, Harlow said. He was at the secondary sensor station, reading the same variants. Source? Yuen ran the trace with the speed of someone whose analytical capability had been running at full capacity for an hour, and who had developed a comprehensive model of the portal's energy architecture in that hour. The trace was not difficult. The source was clearly defined in the sensor data. The source was Containment Block 7. SCP-7491, she said. The word landed on the observation deck with the specific weight that SCP-7491's designation had carried since the first researcher had coined it. The weight of 11 years of maximum containment and the understanding of why maximum containment was required. Now Harlow was very still for a moment. It's interfering with the portal, he said. Yes, Yuen said. The fluctuation pattern is deliberate. It's not random variance, it's targeted. She ran the interference pattern against the portal's stability model. It's destabilizing the boundary at specific frequency intervals. If the pattern continues, the portal expands, Harlow said. Catastrophically, Ewan said. If the dimensional boundary loses integrity under destabilization conditions rather than controlled collapse, both realities could experience boundary dissolution at the intersection point. The intersection point is experimental wing D and a 4-block radius of Shinjuku North simultaneously. Through the portal, Deku heard this. He had been standing at the Hero World side of the portal during the sensor analysis, on the translation bridge carrying Ewan and Harlow's conversation in imperfect but comprehensible fragments. He had his notebook out. He had been making notes. He stopped making notes. "How long?" he said. "At the current destabilization rate," Ewan said. "The boundary loses integrity in 22 minutes. SCP-7491, Deku said. "What is it?" Harlow looked at him through the portal. "An anomalous intelligence. Cater class. Contained for 11 years. It engineered the portal opening." Deku was very still for a moment. "It engineered it," he said. "This wasn't an accident." "No," Harlow said. "The calibration error was real. But the calibration error was created by SCP-7491's interference with our experimental array over a period of years." He paused. "It has been planning this for a very long time." "What does it want?" Deku said. Harlow looked at Ewan. Ewan looked at her sensor data, at the interference pattern, at the specific frequency targeting that the destabilization was using. Not random, not broad spectrum, targeted at the portal's frequency nodes with a precision that required detailed knowledge of the portal's architecture. "It knows the portal's structure," she said. "It's been reading our communication systems. It has our research data." She paused. "The targeting is, it's not trying to destroy the portal. It's trying to reshape it. The interference pattern would produce a larger aperture but a less stable one. Less stable in a specific way. Stable enough for physical passage, but not stable enough for controlled operation." "It wants to come through," Harlow said. "No," Ewan said. She was still reading the interference pattern. The data giving her more information the longer she looked at it. "It's not targeting physical passage coordinates. It's targeting the energy interface. The point where the portal's dimensional boundary intersects with the ambient quirk energy from the Hero World." She looked up. "It wants to interface with the quirk energy. Not pass through. Interface. It wants access to the quirks," Deku said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone who had connected a conclusion to a set of premises and did not like what the conclusion was. "To a specific quirk," Ewan said. She looked at her sensor data one more time. "The interference frequency is matched to a specific energy signature in our monitoring data. The energy signature we logged when you approached the portal, Midoriya." She looked at him. "It's targeting one for all." The observation deck was very quiet. Deku looked at his hands, at the power that had been passed to him through a chain of wielders that extended back to the first, the power that carried every previous holder's will and every previous holder's strength, and that had, in Yuan's sensor data, apparently produced an energy signature distinctive enough that an entity in Containment Block 7 had read it through the Foundation's monitoring systems and had decided it was worth engineering an 11-year plan around. "What would it do with it?" Deku said. "If it got access?" "We don't know," Harlow said. "We've never fully understood SCP-7491's objective. It has been in containment since we found it. Before containment, it was associated with a series of events that our analysts have been trying to classify for 11 years. He paused. "What we know is that it is an intelligence of significant capability that has been patient enough to plan this for 11 years and precise enough to execute the plan through a calibration error in a research array while in maximum security containment." "That's what you know," Deku said. "What do you think?" Harlow looked at him. "I think," he said carefully, "that something that patient and that precise has an objective that is larger than escape. Escape could have been attempted at multiple points in the past 11 years. It chose this approach. It chose this timing. It chose you." Deku held this. 19 minutes, Yuan said. Boundary dissolution in 19 minutes at current destabilization rate. We need to close the portal, Deku said. Correctly, before the destabilization crosses the point of no return. Endeavor's quirk suppression will collapse the breach, Yuan said. But the destabilization has compromised the collapse window. If we suppress the energy source now, the collapse might not be clean. What makes it clean? Deku said. Yuan looked at her sensor data, at the portal's energy architecture and the interference pattern and the specific frequency at which SCP-7491 was targeting the dimensional boundary. A counter-frequency, she said. If the portal's energy interface receives a counter-signal at the specific frequency SCP-7491 is using for the interference, the destabilization stops. The portal returns to stable parameters. Then, Endeavor suppresses his quirk, and the breach closes cleanly. What produces the counter-frequency? Deku said. Yuan looked at him, at the energy signature that her monitoring data had logged when he approached the portal. You already know, she said. Deku looked at his hands, at the power in them, the power that 8 wielders had poured their lives into, that All Might had carried until there was nothing left of it to carry, that Deku had been given not because he was the strongest available, but because he was the one who ran toward the danger without asking whether he could survive it first. If I interface with the portal directly, he said, One for All's energy against SCP-7491's interference frequency, it counteracts the destabilization. In theory, Yuan said. What's the risk? Deku said. SCP-7491 will be attempting to use the interface to access One for All's energy architecture, Yuan said. If the interface goes the wrong direction, it gets what it was planning for, Deku said. Yes, Yuan said. Deku looked at the portal, at the shimmer of the dimensional boundary with experimental Wing D on the other side, Harlow and Yuan and the Foundation's 23 years of managing the impossible on the other side. At Endeavor beside him, who had been in containment for 49 minutes, and who was looking at him with the expression of someone who had assessed the situation and was waiting for the decision. What do you think it wants One for All for? Deku said to Endeavor. Endeavor looked at the portal. 11 years of containment, he said. Planning something for 11 years means the thing you're planning is larger than you can accomplish from where you are. The portal is the mechanism. Whatever it was trying to do through One for All, that's the objective. A containment it can't break from the inside, Deku said. A different kind of containment than 4 walls, Endeavor said. Something it needs specific power to address. Deku was quiet for a moment. Could One for All do it? He said. Whatever SCP-7491 is trying to break. Could One for All actually do it? We don't know what it's trying to break, Harlow said. No, Deku said. But if it's been planning this for 11 years and it chose this specific power, it chose it because this specific power can do the specific thing. Otherwise, it would have chosen something else. He paused. Which means One for All can do something the Foundation has been containing for 11 years and doesn't know how to address. The observation deck was very quiet again. 16 minutes, Yuan said. Deku made his decision. Not quickly, not the instant resolution of someone who hadn't thought it through. The specific decision of someone who had thought it through completely in the time available and had arrived at the only conclusion the analysis supported. I'm going to interface with the portal, he said. But I'm going to do it my way, not the way SCP-7491 planned for. He looked at Harlow. Your monitoring system, can it track the interface in real time? Can UN watch what's happening to the energy architecture while I'm in contact? Yes, Harlow said. Then she's my eyes, Deku said. If the interface starts going toward SCP-7491's objective rather than mine, she tells me immediately and I break contact. Breaking contact mid-interface could... Yuan started. I know, Deku said. Tell me anyway. Yuan looked at him. At the young hero who had arrived at a crisis with a documentation notebook and had spent the last hour treating the impossible as a problem with a solution. At the specific quality of someone who was afraid. She could see the fear. It was real and honest. And who was going to act anyway because the action was what the situation required? Breaking contact mid-interface will produce an energy discharge, she said. Significant. The discharge would propagate through the portal boundary in both directions. Site 19 is designed for energy events. Shinjuku North is not. How significant? Deku said. City block radius, Yuen said. Minimum. Then I don't break contact mid-interface, Deku said. I finish it. He looked at Yuen. If it starts going wrong, don't tell me to stop. Tell me to go faster. He turned to Hawks. Evacuate the block radius, he said. Everyone, now. Hawks looked at him. How long do you need? Hawks said. 8 minutes, Deku said. I think. You think, Hawks said. I'm working with incomplete data, Deku said. 8 minutes is the estimate. Then I'll have it done in 6, Hawks said. And he was already moving, the crimson feathers extending to their maximum deployment radius, the evacuation beginning before the word was finished. Deku turned back to the portal, to the shimmer of the dimensional boundary, to the thing on the other side that had been patient for 11 years and that was currently interfering with the frequency of reality itself in pursuit of an objective that was either something that needed to be stopped or something that the world, both worlds, needed done and didn't know how to ask for. He raised his hand. One for all's energy gathered in his palm, not at full output, not the 100% that broke his own bones, but the controlled channeling of a power that he had been learning to use without destroying himself for 2 years. The specific discipline of someone who had spent 2 years turning a weapon into a tool. He touched the portal. The interface produced a sensation that was not physical, not the pain of a quirk pushed past its limit, not the specific bone-deep impact of One for All's full output on something older, something that his power recognized in the way that old things recognized each other. The specific recognition of a quirk that carried the lives of 8 people encountering an energy that had been alive, in some sense, of alive, for longer than any of them. SCP-7491's interference frequency hit the interface like a current. Deku pushed back, not with force, with the specific channeling of One for All's accumulated will. 8 wielders' worth of purpose, directed through a 16-year-old's hands at a frequency that was trying to reshape the nature of reality between 2 worlds, for reasons that the Foundation had been trying to understand for 11 years. Energy architecture is stable. Yuen's voice came through the comm. The interface is counteracting the interference, and our destabilization rate is dropping. Deku held. SCP-7491's interference intensified. The entity on the other side of the containment wall apparently recognizing that its frequency was being countered and responding with the increase in intensity that an intelligence 11 years in the planning applied when its plan encountered resistance. The interface became the specific experience of 2 incompatible things pressed against each other, neither able to fully yield, the specific standoff of 2 powers meeting at a dimensional boundary. Midoriya, Yuen said. The interference is trying to redirect. It's looking for the gap between your counter frequency and the portal's natural resonance. If it finds the gap, it doesn't find it, Deku said. Tell me the gap's size. 3 degrees off the current counter frequency, Yuen said. Rotate left. Deku adjusted. He did not know what rotating a quirk's energy frequency left meant in technical terms. He knew what it felt like. The specific directional quality of One for All's output, the way that 8 people's accumulated power had grain to it the way wood had grain, the way that working with the grain rather than against it was the difference between control and force. He rotated left. The gap closed. Interference rate dropping, Yuen said. Destabilization reversing, portal returning to stable parameters. A pause. Midoriya, SCP-7491's interference just stopped. Deku stayed in contact. Why did it stop? He said. I don't know, Yuen said. The interference pattern just ceased. No gradual reduction. Immediate cessation. Another pause. The portal is fully stable. Endeavor can suppress his quirk. The collapse will be clean. Deku looked at the dimensional boundary. At the shimmer of it, stable now, the interference gone. Site 19 visible through it with the specific clarity of a portal that was no longer under stress. He did not pull his hand back. "Something happened," he said. SCP-7491 was pushing toward One for All, and then it stopped. Why did it stop? The answer came from Harlow. Not from the sensor data. From Harlow himself, standing on the observation deck with the specific expression of someone who had spent 23 years managing anomalous situations and had just encountered a piece of information that reorganized his understanding of one that had been running for 11 years. "Block 7 monitoring," Harlow said to his comm. SCP-7491 current status. The monitoring channel responded after a 2-second pause. SCP-7491 appears dormant, the monitoring officer said. Anomalous activity ceased approximately 90 seconds ago. No electromagnetic output, no behavioral indicators. Another pause. "Sir, the containment field in Block 7 is reading a property it's never registered before. The field it's reading the absence of something that was there, like a weight has been removed from it." Harlow was quiet for a long moment. SCP-7491's objective, he said. The thing it has been in containment because of. The thing it needed specific power to address. He looked at Deku. It was contained within itself. Deku stared at him. It didn't want to escape, Harlow said. It wanted to be freed from something that was part of it. Oh, something that our containment field was holding in place along with the entity itself. Something that the entity could not remove on its own, from the inside, regardless of how patient it was or how precisely it planned. He looked at the portal. One for All's energy interface provided the mechanism, not the way SCP-7491 planned. In the contact, in the push and the counter-push, One for All's accumulated will provided the counter frequency for something inside SCP-7491 that SCP-7491 could not counter itself. The observation deck was very quiet. Deku looked at his hand, at the power in it, the power that 8 people had given everything for, that had been passed through a chain because one person alone was never enough, and because the passing was the point. "It used me," he said. "Not the way it planned to," Harlow said. "I think what happened was different from what it intended. I think the contact produced something it didn't predict." He paused. "We'll need to study Block 7 extensively before I can tell you what exactly happened." Deku pulled his hand back from the portal. The interface ended. The portal's shimmer stabilized into its final configuration, fully stable, clean, the dimensional boundary holding without stress or interference. "Endeavor," Deku said. Endeavor looked at him. "You can suppress it now," Deku said. Endeavor looked at the portal. At Tokyo visible through it. His city, the city he had been protecting for 30 years, the city that SCP-777 had walked through for 45 minutes. And that was now, feathers confirmed by hawks, eye clear of the entity and beginning the specific process of understanding what had happened to it today. He suppressed his quirk. The flames went out, not entirely. Endeavor's quirk was not something that could be fully suppressed, but the specific output that was interfacing with the portal's energy system reduced to below the threshold that was maintaining the breach. The dimensional boundary destabilized in the controlled way of a system that had been planned for, the shimmer decreasing in intensity, the sight of Site 19 on the other side becoming less clear, the specific dissolution of a portal that was closing because the energy maintaining it had been reduced, rather than because the reality around it had been damaged. The portal closed at 16:04, 1 hour and 41 minutes after it had opened. The observation deck was empty space. Site 19 was on the other side. Hero Society was on this side, and in between, the specific absence of a dimensional boundary that had been open and was now closed. Not destroyed, not damaged, just closed, with the specific finality of a door that has been shut by someone who has decided it should be shut, rather than forced shut by someone who had no other option. Hawks found Deku sitting on the pavement outside the Dagobah warehouse at 1619. Sitting, not standing, which was unusual for Deku in the aftermath of a crisis. Deku's aftermath mode was documentation and analysis, not sitting. His notebook was on his knee, but he wasn't writing in it. "You okay?" Hawks said. "Thinking," Deku said. "About SCP-7491, Hawks said. "About what Harlow said," Deku said. "That it was contained within itself. That the Foundation's containment field was holding something in place that was part of the entity. Something the entity wanted removed." He looked at the notebook. "That's 11 years of containment. 11 years of being held in a room with something that was part of you that you couldn't remove." Hawks was quiet for a moment. "You feel sorry for it." "I feel like I don't understand it," Deku said. "And not understanding it bothers me more than the alternative." He paused. "In Hero Society, we have a principle. Understand the threat before you respond to it. Because the response to a threat you don't understand is almost always wrong in some way." He looked at the warehouse, at the sealed doors behind which SCP-777 was dormant in an empty space. "The Foundation contains things it doesn't understand. It contains them safely. The containment is right, I think. But the not understanding, that bothers me." "It bothers them too," Hawks said. "Harlow has been studying SCP-7491 for 11 years. And he still didn't know what it wanted until it got it," Deku said. "Yes," Hawks said. Deku looked at his notebook, at the blank page where he hadn't written anything. He picked up the pen, and at the top of the page, in the careful documentation style that he had developed over 2 years of studying heroes and quirks and the specific problems that the world produced, he wrote, "SCP Foundation. 2 worlds. Same problem. Different answers." He looked at what he had written for a moment. Then he wrote one more line. "What can we learn from each other?" Mirko found the communication device on her hero uniform 3 days later. Small, Foundation-issue hardware. She recognized the design language from the equipment that Chen's MTF team had been carrying. Tucked into the inside pocket of her hero costume in the specific position of something that had been placed deliberately rather than dropped accidentally. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned it on. A single message was waiting. "MTF Commander Chen. For when the questions become important enough to ask, frequency is secure. C." Mirko looked at the device. At the sealed frequency that represented a line of communication between 2 worlds that had spent 1 afternoon as enemies and 45 minutes as reluctant allies, and the rest of the day as something that didn't have a name yet. She did not call, not yet, but she kept the device. And in Site-19's Containment Block 7, the monitoring team was still trying to understand what had changed in SCP-7491's containment field. What the absence was that they were reading. What weight had been removed. What the entity that had been planning for 11 years had finally, through a 16-year-old hero's hands, managed to address. The research would take years. The Foundation was good at years. And in Experimental Wing D, the sealed observation chamber held the specific quiet of a room where a portal had been and was no longer, while the reality anchors back at their standard parameters. The calibration error that had started everything corrected and logged and added to the Foundation's comprehensive documentation of things that should never happen again. Dr. Ewan's incident report was 47 pages long. She had wanted to make it longer. She had material for considerably more than 47 pages. But the last line of the 47 pages was not a technical summary or a protocol recommendation or a classification update. It was a note, written in the documentation style that researchers used for observations that were significant, but that didn't fit the standard categories. It said, "The hero Midoriya, when asked about the Foundation's containment philosophy, said, 'I don't think you're wrong. I think we've developed different answers to the same problem because our worlds gave us different parameters.' This is the most accurate external description of the Foundation's operational philosophy I have encountered in 14 years of research. Recommend further contact, pending authorization. She submitted the report. She waited for authorization. She thought about the young hero with the documentation notebook and the question he had written at the top of a blank page. What can we learn from each other? She thought it was probably the right question.